That morning, the sky was gloomy and there was hardly any sunlight. The school seemed to be in a slumber, and occasionally the wind blew by, making a few low sounds. The atmosphere in the school was always a bit dull, but today was different. I sensed an indescribable sense of tension. It wasn't because of the midterm exam results, nor was it because our class had a mountain of math homework, but because something unusual had happened. I was chatting with a few friends in the classroom, looking forward to the basketball game in the afternoon. Suddenly, the usually calm voice of the principal came through the loudspeaker. Every word she said made our hearts skip a beat. Attention everyone, the school is now in an emergency state. All teachers are required to carry out the lockdown procedure immediately. This is not a drill. All students, please stay on alert. For a moment, the whole classroom fell silent. My friends exchanged puzzled looks with each other, and no one dared to speak. I remember a boy asking in a low voice, "What on earth has happened?" But nobody knew the answer. Then, our teacher immediately got up, closed the windows, and drew the curtains. She didn't say much, but her face clearly became solemn. She turned off the lights in the classroom and instructed us all to sit down with our heads bowed, as if we were about to assume a defensive posture. There was an atmosphere of unease in the air. We sat there quietly, listening to the wind outside and the occasional noisy sounds. 40 minutes passed. Suddenly, there was a rush of hurried footsteps in the corridor. Then, a shrill shout pierced the silence. That voice didn't belong to a student. It was full of violence and despair, sounding like someone was shouting crazily. I and a few friends glanced at each other, and our faces turned pale all of a sudden. A girl was crying softly, covering her mouth with her hand, trying hard to keep quiet. The boys on the other side clenched their fists nervously. After that, the voice got closer and closer. It was a man's voice, and he shouted in the corridor, "Don't you all run away! I'll kill you all! I'll kill you all!" His voice was hysterical, full of irrational anger. By this time, the classroom had become extremely quiet. "He's coming," a boy whispered. I unconsciously stood up, my eyes fixed firmly on the door. The classroom door was locked tightly, but I still felt a huge sense of uneasiness, as if the crazy man outside would burst in at any moment. The sound outside the door was getting closer and closer until I could hear his crazy shouts. "We can't just sit here like this." However, we didn't know what to do. At that moment, all our rationality seemed to be suppressed by fear, and any thoughts seemed powerless. All we could do was cover our ears tightly, close our eyes, and pray that the man would leave. But that man didn't leave. The banging on the door outside became louder and louder, each sound like a heavy head hitting. Suddenly, a dull gunshot rang out from the other end of the corridor, echoing throughout the school. Immediately after that, all the sounds stopped suddenly. In that instant, the whole world seemed to freeze. We held our breath. After about 5 minutes, the broadcast system came on again. The principal's voice was calmer than before. "The situation has been brought under control. Please stay quiet and continue to stay in the classroom until further notice. The police have arrived at the scene." I breathed a sigh of relief, but that sense of tension was only temporary. We didn't know what had happened, nor did we know if that crazy man was climbing around or not. A few hours later, we learned more details. It turned out that the man was a person with mental problems. He had broken into the school with the intention of threatening the teachers and students. In the corridor, he had a conflict with the security guards and fired a shot. Fortunately, the bullet didn't hit anyone. After the police arrived, they immediately sealed off the entire campus and successfully subdued the man. Although this incident had passed, my mood still hadn't calmed down. The fear at that moment was something I could never forget. I didn't know if I would encounter a similar situation again, and I hadn't encountered one so far. It was just that the sense of isolation and helplessness at that moment and the intuition of death made me understand that life was so precious. A few days later, the school resumed its normal routine. but every time I walked down the corridor, I couldn't help but recall that man's screams and the gunshot. They lingered in my mind, as if they would echo again at any time. I think this fear might fade away as time passes,